All right, hey everyone, welcome to our panel. We're really excited about this. This is Black Women on Accountability. We're really happy that everyone can be here. So just know you can drop questions in the chat. We do have people monitoring the chat, so if you have any questions or you want to share your point of view, we'd love to hear that. So yeah, I just want to go around and introduce everyone. I'm your host, Vanessa, Yogini Princess. Normally a yoga teacher, always a writer, and today I'm out for a really good story and wanted to talk to everyone. So, do we want to introduce ourselves?
Hi everyone, my name is Vivian Allen. Born and raised in Oakland, part of many communities, OSA, Berkeley City College, UCLA. I'm very grateful to be here in this space.
I'm Kira Allen. I'm a poet, author, artist, activist, long decades in Oakland.
My name is Taylor. I'm a model. I'm really grateful to be here. I'm really grateful for this space, this conversation. It's very necessary. So I'm looking forward to it.
Hi everyone, I'm Shay. I'm born and raised in Oakland. I am also very glad to be here, as well as being proud of being a woman. So, yeah.
Hi everybody, my name is Azaria. I am a full-time college educator today. I do a lot of activism and grassroots work.
All right, so we wanted to start off, before we get really heavy into our discussion of accountability, why don't we take some time to define what accountability is? I wanted to ask each of you if you have personal examples of accountability that you've experienced in your life. So, yeah, does anyone have any?
Well, we did a deep dive this afternoon, thinking about accountability just in words, and discovered that accountability is adjective, as is a lot of other words. What?
Okay.
Do I need to be closer to someone?
I guess if you want to step forward.
Okay. So I just, as a wordsmith, I did a lot of looking at accountability as a word and words like it, and they all came up as adjectives, which I thought was really fascinating, because I was really looking for a verb, like an action. What action can be taken? And what came to me is that it's about engagement. It's about really holding a space where it's not just speaking, but it's actually taking action, making a correction.
Yeah, I had no idea that accountability is an adjective. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Intuitively, I would have thought that when we look for something where there's some tangibility to it,
Right.
there's some very, visibility to it, but
So does anyone have an example of maybe someone did something that wronged them, and you went after a resolution and you got it, and you got what you felt like was accountability? Does anyone have a story?
I feel like for myself, my experiences, I grew up in a predominantly white community, and we really have to speak up. Okay, so I grew up in a predominantly white community, and for me, it was my identity was completely all over the place, but my example of accountability would look like in the home, because without kind of being too intrusive on my own life, I think there needs to be some teaching in the home around what Blackness meant to me and how much of an impact it had on who I was, because I didn't know who I was because of the people that I was around. And it looked a lot like correction, a lot like you heard me when you made this comment, because I'm not accepted necessarily within my community at large. So I need to be accepted in my home because that is very important to me. And this is what I come back to. Two, this is my safe space. This is the space that resonates with who I am. So for me, it just looked like a lot of conversations around and centered around expression and correction.
Yeah, I thought a lot about this question, and I dug around for a long time trying to think of an example of accountability in my life and what that looks like. And it was a little frustrating that I came up with nothing, right? And I think as a writer, we're kind of good at being able to come up with something out of nothing. So it was surprising for me to think about this. And I think that just goes to show what a lack of accountability there really is in so many of our lives. And you don't even have to live a life or identify as being a victim to living a life where there's no accountability. And I feel like the spirit of the protest and what's happening out on the streets right now, it's more weird to me accountability because there's no accountability, right? Is there anyone that can maybe speak to the lack of accountability in their lives and maybe how that's kind of shaped them and their character?
So I can say that one of the things that happened in my life is that I have both a Black parent and my brother raped me when I was 9 years old. And as a consequence, I avoided that side of my family most of my entire life, except my mom, of course. And my mom sort of wants to be an apologist and act as if that didn't happen. And so very recently, and this was years and years ago, but very recently, she apologized to me as someone who didn't hold herself accountable as like standing by me rather than her. And that, I think, is a most recent example of accountability, although it wasn't from the person who injured me. It was a different kind of injury to have her keep saying, well, don't you want to do this? And don't you want to participate in that? And it's like, no, Mom, I actually don't. And so having a lifetime of those kinds of experiences and setting a strong boundary within myself that said, actually, I'm not going to participate with these people that don't care about me, and I'm sorry that you feel some other kind of way.
I have a question for that.
Yeah.
Do you all think that accountability or proper healing can still come from another source rather than the perpetrator or the person who put you in a space to be violated? Can it come from a different source, or does it have to come from that individual for you to experience the wholehearted healing?
I would say it has to come from other sources because 99.9% of the time it's not going to come from a perpetrator. And if you are waiting for that, you're going to be waiting a lifetime. And so finding other ways is really important.
Yeah, this brings us to our next topic. We wanted to talk about rape apologism and kind of this practice of people who, things come out about their friends they come out about their family, how maybe a family member or a friend assaulted someone, and they immediately don't believe them, right? Or they make excuses. So we can talk a little bit about that. How can we hold our friends and family members accountable when, accusations of assault happen?
Okay, so hey y'all, I recently had a conversation with my dear friend who called me out on this, and I think even in the organizing of this meeting, there was a place where when we started to bring up these topics about what it means to engage with, rape apologists, or, how do we talk about accountability when there are folks who might have different interactions with the person who's being accused, right, being held accountable for their actions, and how do we navigate that as folks who are still like moving with compassion. And I think, in the conversation I had with my mom, Kira, before this is like, our family, our family has majority of the women in our family have experienced rape or sexual assault. And so and generally, right, like 1 in 4 women experience this in the world. And so it made me think about how the context around our relationship to these folks can like impede our judgment. And I think it's important for us to still be critical, even if our experience with that person is different. And I appreciate those in my life who have called me out on that and challenged me to think differently about that. And I hope that you all who are listening, and even if there are folks who aren't on this call right now, that you are one of the people in other folks' lives who take that I think this is a huge step in what it looks like to hold yourself and others accountable, is to challenge, be critical, and for me personally, like my own relationship to accountability, sometimes when I realize at least that other folks are trying to hold me accountable for a way in which I've hurt them, just in general, sometimes it can feel like an attack. And so our first response is to get really defensive and to try to say, oh, this was my intent. I didn't mean to hurt you, and therefore I didn't. Or I'm sorry that that's how you feel, and carry on with however we feel and take up space in this moment that isn't really about us. What's important is to listen and then to turn inward and say, oh, how can I show up differently? And then really move in that and take action in that difference, as opposed to defending yourself in the harm that was already caused, And that's challenging work. I think a lot of the time, especially right now when we're already in a place of feeling super anxious, we're not getting a lot of sleep because of these fireworks or whatever is going on, it puts another layer of a challenge on top of something that's already challenging on its own. It's challenging, so that's what came up in my mind.
Yeah, this reminds me of a high school English teacher that I had, and it came out that he was in possession of and was selling child pornography. And my first thought, looking at his mugshot, was not Mr. Silva, not the man who showed up in a suit and a tie to a high school English class and made that class special, right? But we have this narrative of people who rape and assault as being people who work in alleyways and people who, look ugly and hardened and all this, and that exists. But rapists are our friends and our teachers, right, and our heroes and our actors. So I think a part of this, we need to start deconstructing the image that we kind of all collectively held about what someone who is a rapist looks like, right? So, and I know this is a conversation that we're having mostly about how we can hold men accountable, but we also need to deconstruct the idea that straight men are the only ones who commit crimes, sexual crimes, right? Does anyone have anything to say, add on?
I feel like we need to just stop being afraid to speak out, and whether that be your friend, like like others in this room have heard recently that someone we all know was being accused of either raping or sexually assaulting someone. And as you're like reading through the comments, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, well, you have half of people saying, oh, yeah, I believe the girl, and yada, 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 this and that. And you have the other half who say, well, in my experience, that person is not like that. It's like, well, your experience with that person isn't like this. It doesn't mean that your experience is like that. And then it's also just like, I really just feel that it's just built upon fear. Like the reason why we're not taking accountability as a community, as a whole. You know what I mean? It's just like, what are we afraid of? You know? It's like, why can't you just call your brother out and be like, hey, like when I'm with my big brother, my beloved brother, we're in the car, he's hollering at a girl outside the car, I'll be smacking him like, that's so disrespectful, that's so rude. You know what I mean? It's just like, I also, if you guys really know me, like I do that to my friends in general, you know what I mean? It's just, I feel like we just need to, I don't know, just eliminate that fear and just call each other out on the BS. Because that's exactly what it is. You know what I mean? I'm tired of sugarcoating, I'm tired of people just trying to cover up things. Like, no, it's just straight up BS. Call them out. If you don't feel like you want to call them out on social media, you feel me? I'm sorry. If you feel like you don't want to call them out, like, what's it called? Cancel culture? No. Like, exactly what I'm saying, like adding them, you know what I mean, to where it's public, send them a DM, you know what I mean? Call them, text them, pull up on them, you know what I mean?
So, and then this brings us to, as far as like what it looks like to call somebody out. I think kind of the thing that's become big now is cancel culture. You know, when it comes out, especially when someone who is like an influencer or famous or has considerable power or makes art to like cancel that, right? And to kind of stop giving them money or buying something. So, what do we think about that as long-term a solution to accountability? Are there other ways that we can call people out for things that they've been accused of doing that might not include cancel culture? Is cancel culture problematic? You know, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's critical that we think about the ways in which if we just cancel someone, we don't actually hold them bring them into a space where they start to do better, where they start to understand the ways in which what they've done has really harmed someone. And unfortunately, male entitlement often leads to a place where someone has done something and then, oh, I didn't mean that. Well, yeah, dude, you did. And how do you start to talk about consent, not just as like we're on a date, therefore I get to do whatever I want, or actually now all this has happened, and now how can we sit, you know, and I don't mean to be hokey, but like almost in a village culture of like, no, you're gonna sit and you're gonna listen and you're gonna hear and you're gonna feel what this felt like to me, so that you never do this to anyone ever again. And I'm talking about specifically within the Black community, because I know one of the things is that we're hesitant in this day and age to call police on our brothers. And yet, if we're not, how are we ever gonna stop the cycle?
I also feel like we're too quick to accept apologies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Especially with the whole cancel culture now. It's like you see one of your own celebrities being canceled out about whatever race. And I don't know, maybe 30 minutes later after that post went on Shade Room, we have these million viewers commenting and saying this and that, we're canceling you, we're canceling them. And then that celebrity makes a post, an apology post, why you did this? I just don't know, I'm not used to it. I've never been in this situation before, and all of a sudden it's just like, oh, it's okay, she apologized. You know what I mean? She's never been around a lot of Black people before. What do you expect? You know what I mean? So then we just wear our heads, and then we accept it back in. It's like, what does accountability look like what Pierre said for them? Like, what is it? You know what I mean? When is enough enough?
I think that there's common theme of intent versus impact that Vera really touched on. I feel like to a certain extent, a lot of people don't recognize, especially too within our community, like how much generational trauma is already carried on through us and how much that is perpetuated continually when there's a lack of accountability. So it's, regardless, like you said, it's about deconstructing ego, completely doing away with this instant being about you and being about your explanation as to why you did what you did, but more so really providing space for the individual or the individuals affected to allow them to, you need to sit in that pain. You need to realize how much this has impacted me. This has impacted me into my adulthood. This has impacted me into the way that I move, the way that I think, the way that I shape, the way that I perceive the world, the way that I perceive you, the way that I perceive other people who look like you. Like, it can get so granular, and I think that's something that can just be done away with so quickly when people don't take the time to assess and do away with what their intention was. Frankly, I don't care what you do, because it doesn't justify it. It may make it in certain circumstances, where compassion needs to be had because maybe that was passed on to you or that was a learned behavior, but that doesn't do away with the fact that action is right. And you need to be held accountable, and you have to disrupt that behavior right then and there, because if you if you continually deal with that behavior or you allow it to persist, it's just going to continue to just rot not only them, but the people in their inner circle, their outer circle, and so on and so forth.
Also, I wanted to bring up a point, like when we had our brainstorming session and we were talking about the certain individual who had been called out for their breach of consent, I think. So for the people who are watching, there was an instance where somebody who's been really active in advocating for abolition and certain changes in the status quo, where they were called out for sexually assaulting someone. When they were called out, they made a long thread of tweets in which they said, oh, well, yes, a couple years back, I breached consent while engaging with my partner at the time. And also, the problem with this was multifaceted. One, you have somebody trying to escape accountability by calling it what it wasn't. It wasn't a breach of consent, it was rape, right? So you have that, and then also you have someone who thinks that it's okay to go to social media and kind of, I want to say half apologize, like you were talking about earlier, where people would just say, well, I'm sorry, and then think that they can move on. But we have to consistently remember that people who perpetuate gratuitous violence against our community don't have a place in leadership when it comes to revolution and activism. And so there was a major call for this person to deplatform after all they did was add a little circle to their highlights on Instagram as part of their aesthetic, and there was no real accountability that took place in correlation to this. And so after 2 weeks of pressure, all of a sudden their Instagram is gone. All of a sudden their Twitter is gone. And so this is what it looks like when you're not trying to cancel somebody, but trying to make them understand, like, well, you can't call yourself a leader and you can't have this large platform where you continue to say that you're an advocate for the same people that you commit violence against. So you can't say you love Black women, you can't say that you want to protect Black women while at the same time erasing the abuse that you did to a Black woman and trying to gloss over their experiences and their realities and what kind of harm and what kind of implications that has within the Black community, within the status quo. How does that make you look? If you're the person we're supposed to look to as a leader, what kind of leadership skills and what kind of leadership tools are you providing, and how are people supposed to learn from you if you can't even learn from yourself and take accountability for the mistakes that you've made?
Yeah, it brings up a really good point about this kind of pressure to have an aesthetic in our culture, and like, is it inappropriate to try to resolve an issue by glazing an aesthetic over it? Is that kind of the general consensus, that this isn't just something you can put on your social media and post like a little black square or, you know, do whatever you think it looks like. Like, so we're talking about having more tangible forms of resolution, right?
And I also think that we have to get rid of the narrative that just ends right then and there. Accountability is continual. It doesn't just stop, even once that conversation is had, or once an apology is made, because you have to realize that how you impacted that person or those people will forever live on with that person or those people. So I think we really have to do away with it's something that is just a stamp, and then you just do away, and you just sweep it on the rug. It's done. I was accountable, and you know I've admitted to what I did. I apologize. I've done all that I can, because again, it's not about you.
I just want to bring into this other piece, because I'm someone who's of a different generation, so social media is not necessarily my main thing, but I come from intergenerational trauma, and so understanding that 9 times out of 10, someone who has been abused as a child will either become someone who does that, or it will become someone who attracts that. And because we spend so much time in trauma and fear and in holding this idea that all we have to do is escape this person, this situation, this moment, and now we hurry up and we run into someone who actually is about to do the same thing, but now it's our children, or our niece, or our nephew, or our cousin. And so it's not enough as survivors to just say, oh, I got away from him, or I got away from her. No, we have to do the deep internal work of how we've been scarred so that we don't pass those scars on to our children.
I want to say also that to speak to what we were talking about in terms of like highlights and aesthetics, that like this work is not pretty. It's not beautiful. It's none of the, I mean, I think like the healing that can come from it is beautiful, but the work itself is like deep, like challenging, gritty, like real shit that doesn't look, it's not gonna look nice for anyone, especially not the one who has to do the work. And the folks that have to do the work is, I feel like what we've all been saying is like, you know, like you harm someone, realizing, waking up to that, it's uncomfortable. I feel like what you were talking about in terms of fear earlier is like, you're embarrassed, you know, especially like now that we're in this culture of like actually tagging folks, which like to me is very groundbreaking. I feel like that's a big fucking deal that like us, you know, the folks in our generation, younger than us, whatever, the folks who are engaging online, because I do think there are folks, you know, every generation who are, you know, Instagram all the time. So first of all, but just, you know, creating what is being created at this time, the very direct contact, the tagging, the adding, and saying, hey, what's up? I haven't heard you say anything. You know, the very direct, you cannot have this type of platform and expect praise for anything when you are contradicting yourself. You know what I mean? And that real like, that like the platform of like, okay, and now what are you gonna do with it? To me, presents this place of like, okay, if like, because I do have a problem with cancel culture because I don't feel like it always fosters the space for folks to do the work that they need to do. I think like when we shun people, I have no idea what they're doing in the dark over there. They could be festering in the, I feel like I was right all along, and continue to do that shit under a different name, a different alias, whatever, you know? And I'm not saying that's everyone, but I think it's not, I don't know that it will foster the result that we are aiming for, and I think that we are even trying to cultivate in this conversation, but I think all around, you know, like in these spaces on Twitter and Instagram and all these different platforms where we're saying, we're calling people out and like, we might have our own intent or our own vision of what we want for our healing, but to
to engage, right? If we're thinking of accountability as an adjective and engage as a verb, and that's something that we can actually act on. Some of the synonyms that we looked up earlier is like sign up, take on, face. And to me, those things are like, I don't know, it's like, how can you can't, I don't know, I feel like, I'm like, come for me if you need to. But I don't know if that's something that people can do alone. I think in order for them to do that, there needs to be like a space, you know? And I don't know if that's something that happens in the dark. I don't know if that's something that happens. I don't know if that's people's first reaction. What I've seen is like embarrassment. I've seen discomfort. I've seen that like reaction of like, I can't believe they did that online. I feel so betrayed that I was called out, you know? And it's like, all right, and now what are we gonna do? And I'm not saying that we need to hold these people's hands, no, but like, what then, you know?
I think that the goal is never necessarily to cancel somebody and to erase them from society, but more so to get them to see like that they can't hold leadership positions. So very personal example for me is I was a member of the Bay Area Urban Big League for several years. I apologize to a certain individual on here because I'm talking about the situation, but we had a conversation about it earlier. But there was a member of this community who was very prominent within the debate sphere. Everybody respected him. Everybody was an apologist to him. He got in debate rounds and he lied about his upbringing, but he was also sexually harassing and abusing several women within debate. From the time I was a freshman all the way through when he was a freshman and a sophomore in college. There was a time where I went to the debate gala at the end of the school year, and I noticed him trying to follow a minor home, saying, oh, well, I'm gonna just stay in the city, my friends are in the city. I was like, oh, really? Because you live in Berkeley, and none of your friends are over here, so how is it that your friends are in the city? So I got somebody to volunteer to give the minor a ride home instead of her taking public transportation. All of a sudden, his plan got canceled. And you could see the girl's visible frustrations and discomfort as we walked through the event because he was always right on her heels, always in her space. You're 19, 20, following someone who hasn't even graduated high school yet. And so as a result, he was banned from coaching for the Bay Area Urban Debate League, and he ended up getting his scholarship to UC Berkeley ripped or stripped from him because you can't be the star debater on the team, rapist and sexually abuse everyone of all ages and then lie about it and refuse to take accountability. When somebody asked him anything about it, he said that he was suicidal, as if that was a response to accountability or a response to somebody saying, hey, you made me uncomfortable, so this is what I'm doing in order to protect myself and other people within the future. And I don't think that it's fair to get to continue to exist within those spaces as a prominent figure, as somebody who's supposed to be a pillar within the community, while people who are also your survivors are trying to exist within that same community. And so it's not just, trying to exist as Black people, but we're in the same microcosm of society. We are both debaters, we are both activists, we are both public speakers, you know, and it's like to have to turn around and see that person at every event that you speak at, it's pretty awkward and pretty uncomfortable for these people. And so why should these people be allowed to be in these spaces without doing any of the work inside? They won't even acknowledge the fact that they did wrong. When somebody tries to intercede on their survivor's behalf and say, hey, so I heard you did X, Y, Z, and then he's like, well, I don't know who told you that. That didn't happen. This person literally has the text messages, literally has the verbatim experiences that they can talk about, and it's still being denied. And so it's like, in those instances, how do you hold somebody accountable besides to tell the communities that they exist inside of, well, this person can't be a part of that community anymore. And it's not that you don't want them to be able to live a life in general, but just like, you can't allow spaces to cater for them when they're not giving to the space the same way they're taking from it. And it has to be a reciprocal kind of relationship. It has to be built upon care for everybody in the community. You don't get to cherry pick and choose when you're going to be an advocate for Black women and when you're going to sexually abuse them and hide your hand. Like so it's always going to be a really sticky situation. And I think that leads into the audience question that was asked: is what does solution look like for the male community within when it comes to accountability? How do we hold men accountable within this community, and how can they hold themselves accountable when trying to engage in transformative or restorative justice in these cases? And how do they do the work? And how do they hold their friends accountable beyond saying, hey, bro, you shouldn't do that? But like, what else can they do? Do they sit them down and lecture them? Or
are they even doing that? That's another question. Are they even doing that? Because I want to tell you that the number one thing that fraternities are insured for is rape. The number one thing they pay out for is rape. And they're very purposefully off campus so that when the campus report comes out about pay, they're not included. It's very deliberate.
well, I mean, but it's not necessarily just the people who are Greek that are asking these questions. It's just like men who have personal conversations. I'll just say, Chose asked this question. And he wants to know, like, how does he hold his partners accountable? And what does that process look like for people who are willing to learn but don't know what survivors need in order to support them in that space? If we don't give them the tools and explain to them what we want to see, they can't really do anything. Because all they can do is say, hey, bro, you shouldn't do that. But how do they create tangible change for the people who have had to survive the violence committed by this individual?
So what I've heard so far, as far as restitution goes, is one, asking to deplatform. So that might maybe come at a later stage, but also not allowing these individuals to have leadership positions. So I think this is kind of more of an organizational response and a communal response. So I'm interested to hear what maybe interpersonally we can do to hold people accountable beyond, hey, you shouldn't do that.
For me personally, if I see that my group of friends, predominantly women, if I can feel that they're messing up, I call them out. And I'll first call them out that first time, whether it be in person, I'll text them, I'll call them. Days later, I'm calling them about it again. So, hey, did you do this? So have you thought about this? I'm very adamant about reading and researching and learning stuff on your own. You know, just don't take my word for it, like just my voice isn't enough. Like, you don't believe me, here's some facts. Google this or Google that. You know what I mean? Don't just be that person and just say, oh, bro, you fucked up. Why would you do that? You know, and just leave it at that comment or whatever. You know what I mean? Continuously check in on them and say, what did you gain from that conversation I had? What did you really hear me say? And then I'm coming to you as a person, not just your friend, but your sister or your brother. You know what I mean? Someone who actually cares about you and loves you. I don't want to just throw you away or cancel you. I don't want you to have to delete your Instagram or unfollow you on Twitter or whatever because you made a mistake or whatever. You know, I want you to be able to actually grasp what I'm trying to tell you. You know what I mean? And understand it. Yeah, like the Vivian says, it's going to take time. Accountability just doesn't happen overnight. You know what I mean? You actually have to put in the work. So I feel like we just have to consistently check in. You know what I mean? That one conversation is not enough.
And I would add that, you know, as Black women, we live at the intersection of sexism and racism. And that, you know, in the same way that we're asking white allies in this movement to not just be not racist, but to actually do anti-racism work, do the work, understand what you're talking about, understand what you've done. You know, you can't erase, you know, what your culture has ingrained in you. And in that same way, I think that men need to do the work of understanding the implications, the long-term, life-altering implications of rape culture, and how it's affecting Black women, all women really, but Black women, because of that intersection, it's like we get pressed down and then we get pressed down again.
Something that I noticed recently, somebody else got called out recently by somebody who was like the middle person for whoever the survivor was. And I'm all for people coming forward because survivors are trying to protect identity or whatever the case may be. But within the demands of said survivors advocate, they were like, oh, well, you need to deplatform for the next 6 months while you engage in restorative actions. So they had agreed to have meetings with a moderator and a mediator so that the person who committed the violence could listen to what their survivor needs were, to what the survivor's needs were, but also to like ask if they were doing an adequate job at holding themselves accountable. And it was interesting up until said individual decided to talk about the abuse that they committed on social media and detail it against the survivor's consent. And so it kind of counteracted all of their claims that they knew what accountability was and they knew what accountability looked like, because, okay, they called you out publicly, they wanted a response. Your response should have been, I understand that you want me to deplatform, I'll commit to not tweeting about anything except for like the work that I'm doing on a grassroots level, and like, but no personal tweets, no engagement in that kind of stuff. I can understand asking for that kind of stuff. However, once you continue to abuse that person emotionally by making them relive the trauma because you've now posted their trauma on the timeline, you have literally contradicted all of the work you claim you've done, because you don't know what accountability looks like, you don't know what prioritizing survivors looks like. And you don't know what transformative means, because it doesn't look like you've transformed if you're detailing emotional violence that you've committed against that person in the past, and then you're not realizing that describing this to the world is an act of emotional violence and warfare. You are perpetuating the gratuitous violence that you claim that you're trying to do the work to combat. And this goes back to the question, how can you be an advocate for Black women if you abuse Black women simultaneously?
I think, I'm not a Black man, obviously. But I just think, I don't know what type of conversations Black men have on a daily. But I feel that these type of conversations that we're having needs to be those conversations that they're having. You know what I mean? So we all in the car, slapping, we're all bringing chip on and sing up, and we will figure this out. I didn't know what you think about rape culture. Let's slide that on in. You know what I mean? Just make it, what's the word? Generalize it. You can normalize it. Yeah. 5 stars. But you know what I mean? Like, what Diario has done, like I praised him on Twitter, but like he's putting in the work to create these spaces for us to have these conversations. You know what I mean? I really don't know any other Black men around our age that's doing so. If they are, let me know. Maybe I'll go to the 10. But there needs to be like more men like Diario. You know what I mean? Like, I remember I was at the lake, I think it was for Juneteenth. And I was really juiced about the panel. I was sitting here telling random Black men, like, yeah, you got that best panel, you know, we talk about this and that. And they were really excited. You know what I mean? And so they were like, okay, well, add me on Instagram. And I'm like, yeah, cool, I'll show you, I'll send you the details whenever I found my, you know. And at first I'm like, yeah, they're just trying to say that so they can just add me on the gram, you know what I mean? But then like days later, I see the deal, like, any updates about this and that? And I'm like, okay, yeah, let me send it to you. You know what I mean? I just feel like we as women need to like start talking to our friends that are males and say, well, let's have a conversation about it. You know what I mean? Listen, you know? Like, or I feel like, or can you ask me, can you ask this question for me? Like, ask your girls this, you know what I mean? Just trying to get that insight from this point of view. You know what I mean? Not just about dating and relationships, because we do that. I do that. I ask my girl, hey, actually, you know? But just like, I think that's the way to hold your girls accountable. You know what I mean?
Ask a question. So I think first I want to do some insight into wellness. But I feel like a lot of the miscommunication between men and women, especially in the Black community, is because it's this stigma around relationships is perfection, is knowing what your partner wants, right? No communication, just knowing. I shouldn't know these things, right? So as someone who's approaching, say a woman on the street, trying to just holler at her, or someone in a relationship, men are actually unaware of how to approach and how to treat them, because they're not being told how to treat them correctly by men. They have no example of that by men, but they're also not being told how women. I'm not placing blame. I'm just saying that men do need to be told, because men are very vocal in telling you what they want from you. And
Can't tell from my porno either.
Exactly. So the reason I asked the question is, what can you all contribute to the conversation? Or, like what I shared with you, because it's very important that women also bring up, hey, you talk to your homeboy about this, or what do you think of this? Like, I'm gonna say names because I don't care. The Jemani situation, them coming out on Twitter and saying everything that he said wasn't for himself. It was more so to he felt bad. Obviously, if he didn't feel any remorse about it, he wouldn't speak. So he felt bad, and that's not okay for him to come out because he felt bad and say everything that he said. He should have came from a place of understanding. But no woman came to him and said, hey, the way you reacting right now is nothing but ego telling you that you did nothing wrong. When you actually did.
Well,
And I need you to hear that, and I need you to go reflect on that and talk to your homeboys and then think about that. That's just the way that I would do it because I'm vocal and I'm gonna tell them about themselves. And but it's not from a place of understanding. It's a place where I'm beating them down essentially mentally because I feel like they don't understand. And that's ego for me because I'm a man. And ego just pops out, and I try to control it. So more insight for women on how I can do better, and instructing and talking and communicating the way that y'all want it to be. Because it's not about the way I want it to be. It's about how can I contribute to a solution for all of y'all.
I think that one of the things you touched on, you touched on a lot of things, but I feel the part about ego and how kind of the interaction between a woman trying to explain to a man what best serves her in that moment, or what is going to best serve Black women in that moment, can come from, can feel like emasculating. Why is a woman trying to tell me what to do? I think it can be flipped in a sense, in that same sense of a man not knowing what to do, as a man assuming like he knows what he should do, rather than asking what I can do. So I feel like at the end of the day, it is a two-part, it is a relationship between two people. At the end of the day, it is, yes, a woman feeling feeling safe enough to express with the hope that she will be heard and that will be, kind of followed through with, but also that a man is taking the time to ask rather than assume. Because I said, I remember when we talked prior to this Zoom call, so many times the voices are kind of answers and solution coming from the voices without and not the voices within. And rather than, of course, there's a lot of learning to be done on both parts because it doesn't just take one person to come up with a multifaceted solution. It's going to take all of us as a community. But at the same time, on a very micro level, it's very important for Black men to humble themselves, especially in the way that they are brought up, very hyper-masculine. So I think it takes a lot it's going to take a lot. And I'm in the same way, I'm not a Black man, but Black men have to humble themselves and come down from what they think they should know or how they think they should move and ask, what do you need me to do? How can I move better for you? How can I serve you? Because I don't know. And please don't assume that I know. And I can't assume that I know because I don't. So it's like everybody has to kind of, on all parts, have to approach the situation with humility, but also with just a vulnerability to learn. Because it shouldn't be it shouldn't be something that's gendered. We are people. So.
Also, I don't really want to talk too much about Jemani's situation because it's still very tender for the Bay, I guess, on Twitter. But there was a lot of what happened in that situation directly correlates to everything that we've been talking about with people caping for their homies and caping for their significant other because they haven't had that kind of experience with him. For women who understood the fault and what was going on and how he was making the situation worse by feeling bad on the timeline, they couldn't say anything because his girlfriend and his homegirls were out here giving them death threats and talking crazy to them. They talked so bad to the girl that she tried to kill herself. And so you have to really think, how can you say you feel bad, but then put somebody's personal information on the internet and expose them to the violence of the community, who are all rape apologists and who are all known for caping, because a lot of them have homies who have committed crimes when it comes to sexual assault within the Bay. And a lot of them are, within those conversations, are trying to hide their homie and protect their homie from accountability, even when their homie's name has been mentioned in these conversations. And so it's kind of hard to say, well, why didn't anybody reach out to him and try to tell him how he was going about it was wrong, when the women in his life were so trying to be an apologist for him and coddle him, that they couldn't let him see what accountability felt like. And regardless of whether or not he raped her, I'm not going to speak on that. It's not my experience. However, if she said it made her uncomfortable, for him to get on social media and bash her in response to her saying, hey, well, you publicly made me uncomfortable, is not accountability. That's not resolution. And she never used the word rape. She said, you made me uncomfortable. And he automatically said, well, sexual assault and rape are the same thing. And he ran with that. And so in these conversations, it's also a matter of being educated. Do you know the definition of sexual assault? Do you know what sexual harassment is? Do you know what rape is? And do you know that they're all bad? And do you know that committing one of them doesn't make you any better than somebody else who's committed one of the others? Like, these are all things that these people have to understand and have to have a desire to understand before they can try and say that their hands are clean or that there's no blood on their hands in this situation. It's like, accountability doesn't look like you getting on Twitter and saying, oh, well, I'm just saying this because I'm trying to clear my name and I'm just trying to let you know I didn't do X, Y, Z. And it's like, nobody even said you did that. People just said take accountability for what you did, and instead you got on social media and bashed the girl in response to that. And that's not healing for the community. That's not a sign of education. That's not a sign for growth. We can't even take you seriously because you call women bitches on a daily basis. Like, how can you expect us to believe that you know how to combat rape culture when you can't even see the humanity in the woman and you refer to her as an animal? Like even your girlfriend, and she don't say nothing about that, but she's quick to apologize on your behalf because she feels some type of way about people attacking you on a public platform for the violence that you're committing. Like, it's impossible for people to be advocates when the people within your inner circle are trying to protect you from accountability and trying to protect you from the real world. Sorry to break it to you, but the real world is not going to hold your hand. And 5 years from now, when you do the same thing to your girlfriend that you did to old girl when you were talking to her, nobody's going to be there to hold you accountable because old girl has scared everybody away that was trying to teach you how to be a better person.
So I'm of the belief that it's not my job as a woman to teach anyone, especially men, how to behave in a healthy way. I think we need to start normalizing and also getting therapy because, when you're talking to someone who has an understanding of the healthy dynamics of a relationship, and if you're being honest, at some point, they're going to see it before you do, right? And they're going to try to correct that dysfunctional behavior. No one's born knowing how to have a healthy relationship. Right? And so for me, I feel like it's every person's individual responsibility to make sure that they know how to have a healthy, how to engage with people in a healthy manner. Right? I feel like as a human being on a planet who's living with other people and, I have values, it's my job to make sure that I'm going to engage with every single person, whether or not it's platonic or sexual, in a way that is respectful, right? And you can't always ask your friends, right? So I think it's everybody's responsibility to maybe do research, to do, like Ashay was saying, reading books. Audrey Lorde has written some really great books about power dynamics in relationships. And I think getting a therapist, and there are plenty of Black therapists who are out there, right? We live in an age where there's so much information and so much more access. To choose to not find that and use that, that's on you. Ignorance really is a choice.
And I would just say that it's also true that women aren't trained to ask for what they need. We, you know, our default position is not to say, oh baby, could you, it's not.
Wait, because I was gonna say, you said something, you said that men think of perfection as knowing what your partner wants without having asked for it. Or like, and I want to just say.
And let me clarify.
Yeah.
I don't believe that.
Yeah.
But, you know, I get put in situations in my current relationship and my past relationships where expectation ruins things because I've never had, I grew up in a household full of women. So me understanding a different norm of my mom telling me everything, like you need to do this, make sure this is done timeline by the time I get home. Right? From my sister being my other mother figure and telling me the same things. So when I say things like they need to be told, it's because when we grow up with our mom, they tell us, right? And I don't expect to know things because I expect someone to tell me what they need from me, what they expect of me up front, so I can better understand and tailor to your needs. And that includes situations where sexual accountability comes into play with the men, right? There's been tons of women out there with who want different things and who handle things differently and who need to be approached differently. I can't tailor all the experience that I've had to one person. So my question is not telling you to take responsibility for your man's action. More so, just saying like, hey, I'm a man, and I'm a black man. This is how I grew up. And obviously I've done the researching. And I mean, Viv is one of the clear examples. Shay is another example. I've been around these women for years. And the way that I carry myself is different than all of my women friends. And I'm also closer to a lot of my women friends than all of them. There's reason for that, right? My understanding is different because I'm a lot more open. And when it comes to ego, I try to shut that off. I'm also a lot more objective and subjective. So I'm able to speak from a place of objectivity rather than putting myself in those situations. So I try and shut off my ego a lot because I'm trying to do the work. But I also still need to be aware of how to treat everyone. Shay doesn't like to be hurt, right? And I know that.
How do you know that though?
Because Shay's told me. You get what I'm saying? So those are the reasons I'm asking. Because now I know how to interact with these women on a daily basis. And other men need to know. Just like I tell my wife that I need. If she, doesn't do things in that way, I'm not trying to change her. But now she's aware that she can try to do things her way to make me feel. And I can try to do things her way to make me feel.
Thank you for clarifying and saying those things. Because I think, I just agree. And I'm trying to work on that to let it go of my ego in order to do the work. Just all of it. I feel like all of it is a lot of us. I think the key, and someone said this, is about individuals. I think so, yeah. So, yeah, right. It's I know. I'm just saying, in this conversation, the other thing I want to bring up is, how we're even talking about gender right now. It's, really, we're talking about it as a binary, and it's really not. And so I just want to, uplift that as something that, if we center ourselves as individuals in this as, work, hold yourself accountable, then that falls away. It's all about what we are as humans, but not to ignore, absolutely not, the ways in which our gender socialization impacts these interactions, the harm, the healing, all of it. Because again, what we were talking about earlier is that men are socialized and masculine people are socialized to be aggressors sexually in general. It's I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna provide for my family and all that. And I don't think that is all. You can, because this gentleman here that I don't know your name,
Down.
because you all, and cis men in the room, I feel you all can speak for yourselves and say how much of that was even your choice and how you learned those things for one, and not to take away the responsibility that you but acknowledging that I think is key. And then as women, or whatever, women identified folks, we're socialized to be the withholders. It's like, ooh, I have this name. You think you want to, it's like a tease situation where like these constructs are then played out in how we engage with one another. And then it's like, and even to me, I think like the idea of like sex positive conversations, like the way in which all of us as human beings have been socialized to keep it a secret, all of it breeds this culture. You know what I mean? Because then we're not told that we can talk about these things openly, and it like creates the dynamic of secrecy and like, just keeping things in the dark. Anyways, there's two other things. No, three. Okay, sorry. So I'm going to talk about, we were talking about consent culture. I was reading something earlier about affirming consent culture as opposed to like uplifting rape culture, and like just in general, like the difference between like abundance and scarcity, or like, affirmations in general. When you're like, I believe in myself versus like, I'm not afraid. Do you get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like to have a phrase that's like rooted in
Affirmation versus
yeah,
self-doubt.
exactly. Okay. Oh no. So if we're talking about consent culture, consent goes beyond sex, and that's like period. Like you can, like all of this, we have consented to be on camera today. We have consented to exist with one another in this room while we're like social distancing. But here we are. Zaria got a mask on. She said what's up in terms of like what her situation is, and like that's something that we have made a mutual agreement about. That's what consent is. It's a mutual agreement, and it can change at any point in time. If I decided I didn't want to be on camera anymore, I can communicate that, and I would dip on camera, because that's what consent culture is. And it goes beyond sex, and even in sex, it's in each moment. And I think there's something we were talking about earlier too, where like men and masculine-centered folks have this socialization to be entitled to fill in the blank, for one, but specifically women's bodies and femme-centered bodies, that it's like, oh, and we're on a date and now I can do whatever the fuck I want, and that's not true. And even from the jump of like trying to get at someone on the street that you don't even know, you feel entitled to talk anytime
or if
you
you're
want.
in a relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever,
Yeah.
you're married.
Yes.
If I'm telling you no, bro, that's no.
Yes. And the other things that are as well, which is resistance. Like these are the things that I feel like are so important to talk about. And really, when we talk about educating one another and engaging in conversation with our brothers and our masculine-centered folks, is like, how have you interacted with someone if they said no? Maybe they didn't even say no, or whatever, maybe it was a physical resistance, right? Or it was, oh, I need to take a water break, or something that indicated that they were uncomfortable. How can we encourage that to become check-in as opposed to, well, I'm gonna just get mine off, right?
Or when it's dead, like,
Right.
we don't have that conversation to see why I'm uncomfortable.
Right, yeah, and I want to speak to that because it even comes from, I would say, even this point of like, you should appreciate the fact that I am engaging with you in this way, as if this is some type of gift you are giving me, or as if, yes, so it's like the entirety of it has to, like there needs to be a shift. And I definitely, not very rarely, does a man in any circumstance or masculine identifying individual feel the need to address and hold space for uncomfortability, because you don't know where that uncomfortability is coming from. It can be rooted in so much sexual trauma, or it can be layered. There can be so much to unpack there. And every, like I said, from moment to moment, like there can be so much profound work or profound insight that can happen right then and there, but you choose not to take advantage of the time, especially as a masculine identifying being in that space, to hold that space for somebody who has been through X, Y, and Z. And I feel like there needs to be more space held in sitting with the uncomfortability of, oh, okay, I recognize you're not comfortable. I recognize this is not going in the way that I expected it to go. Let me step back rather than like, oh, I'm just going, and then even the language that follows. Oh, you just not about that. You're not freaky enough. You're not down enough. You're not like that. The language is just so toxic, and it needs to even like the language, even taking out of. We need to like bitch. You should never. I am not. I do not support. You should never identify another person, especially another female, as a bitch. You have to realize like these layers of just the layers that come under that word, and like the submissive, and the expectation of submission that comes with that word. I language is something that is deeply rooted in accountability, and that's something that needs to be addressed.
And the psychology of it all. Identifying a woman as an object, an animal, it goes beyond just, understanding, right? It's something that's internalized. The moment I call you a bitch, I'm now acknowledging that you're not human and telling you that you're property. Dogs are our pets, right? So I feel like in a way, because I don't approve of it. And you'll never hear me call a woman a bitch, ever. Rarely ever hear that word even come out of my mouth. But like, yeah, exactly. So it's like, I think as a man, I'm very vocal about that and letting others know, because and this goes for trans women too, because when you talk about Selena, right, who got shot because a man couldn't hold his feelings accountable, he felt embarrassed. And that ego of him feeling bad, not for her, but feeling bad for himself, just like in the situation I mentioned earlier, feeling bad for himself for being in that situation, right? Not in a negative light, but more so in an entitlement way. Like I felt this way about you. I felt like you was a bad trans woman, and I'm not okay with that now that I know that you're a trans woman and that you identify.
And let's just talk about too how in several states it is legal to kill a trans person under the gay panic defense. I forget what the actual name of the bill is, but that this is actually written in the Constitution that it is legal to murder a trans person.
To deny jobs.
Under the guise of, I was scared, or I felt embarrassed, or whatever.
Well, and I think it's important in this moment to bring us back to this historical piece, which is to say that enslaved people had no autonomy of their body, had no consent, had no example of ongoing loving relationships, because those relationships were ripped apart, either moving plantations, running away, being killed. All those things could happen. Someone taking their own selves out. And that plays out. It plays out still now today in the ways that we entitle ourselves to something in the sense that a man who's been emasculated by watching his partner be raped, or vice versa, it doesn't have to be male, right? That there's a way in which now I'm going to take what's mine. It's like really real, because somehow that proves that I'm a man again, right? But now you've done nothing but demoralize the person that you claim to be for, right? And that history plays out in so many different ways. It played out within the Black Panther movement. It plays out even now, today, in different activist places, and we have to start to deconstruct it. What is the book, Jody Green?
My body.
Something slave syndrome.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome?
What?
Post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Thank you. The interrogation, right? The understanding, the depth of understanding, and also the depth of what it means to be a survivor. Like, how my body responds. Like, I am someone who didn't just have one experience or two experiences. Like, from age 9 to age 27, there wasn't a year that went by where I wasn't experiencing some form or version of sexual assault. And what I had to come to grips with is that there was a place where in that original event, something happened and I wanted it back. I wanted it back. And so I kept inviting these men in because I kept wanting them to do it different. I wanted them to do it different for me this time. And it never happened. It never fucking happened. Right? But it's like, we don't recognize the idea that someone who's being promiscuous is playing out like a groundhog day. Like a groundhog day of like, I want it to be different. I want someone to see me for who I am and not just as a sexual being. And in doing that, though, I've now become only a sexual being. Right? And we don't understand the psychology of that. We don't hold in our bodies the idea that, like, I have the right to say no. Because actually, years and years and years and years of evidence says no doesn't fucking matter. And so I'm just gonna lay here, or I'm just gonna, whatever the thing is, I'm just gonna let it ride. I'm just gonna hope it turns out different this time. And I'm not saying this because I don't want to hold men accountable. I'm saying there's layers upon layers and layers that play out. And we want to look at someone and identify them and say, oh, that's the, I don't use those words, but you know what I'm saying? S word, C word, all those things. But in fact, aren't we just trying to heal our trauma?
Beautiful, but I was having a conversation with somebody who's very close to me, and they were trying to understand at least where I was coming in my sexual freedom, and I'm trying to break it down to them in a way that they can find at least sympathy where I'm coming from, because I'm like, you have to understand that this is a narrative that I have been telling myself for a very long time because of the trauma that I have gone through in every single instance. This is not, it wasn't instantaneous. It wasn't, one and done situation. This was, like you said, over and over and over again. And there becomes a lot of identity. I feel like a lot of, especially folks who have undergone a lot of trauma, they have found identity in their trauma, emotional relationship with their trauma, and that's how they move, that's how they move sexually, that's how they move as a person, as a being, that's how they be. Like, there's no aspect of themselves that does not incorporate that piece. And it's very frustrating, and it's very overwhelming to not be met where someone can do it right. And it's incredibly, there's a lot of unpacking and a lot of layers within that, and I just feel like it's I'm trying to find the words to explain, because you begin to find worth in that, you begin to find value in that, like value in your trauma becomes your identity. Like, my trauma is who I am. That is all that I am. That is all that is what I contribute to. That and then other narratives became, I cannot heal. I cannot move past this. This is all I experience. This is all that I know. This is all I bring value to any situation, be it platonic or romantic, or familial. I am just, and I don't deserve anything beyond this, because this is all I've experienced. This is all that I come from. So there must not be any light at the end of my time. And then you just continue to perpetuate.
There's an audience question. Somebody would like to know How do you tell a male who you believe is a predator to leave you alone, but also help other people who may be under their influence?
Well, I had a coworker that sexually assaulted me, and that was like my hot outside dog. You know what I mean? We chill, smoke, drink after work, have lunch. You know what I mean? we would be just friends. Like I really consider that person to be my friend. And I noticed that during our interactions, like when we would drink, I noticed he wouldn't drink as much as I. You know, I'm still not like, yeah, you know, I may be tiny, but I can hang with big dogs. You know, okay, for it, I'm not too like that. Right? But then I just started noticing that every time I'd hang out with him, he would like try to touch me or do something, you know. But I noticed it only happened when I would drink. You know, so then I had my other coworkers, and I would just like tell them, hey, like, when you pick up this person, has this ever happened to you? You know what? Yeah. You know, I'm like, okay, well, let me ask someone else. You know, ask the next person. And they were like, yeah, it's happened to me too. You know what I mean? So come to find out, it was like the entire branch, except for the managers, basically. I worked at a bank. And so, just being the type of person that I am, I called him up. Like, hit him up on the phone, like, hey, bro, I don't know if this is your intent or what, but I feel uncomfortable because every time I'm kicking with you and you drink, I know that you don't drink as much as I am, but then you claim that you're drunk, and then you want to start following them, or you know what I mean? And then, there was an instance where I got kind of like, damn near drunk. You know how you get that borderline tipsy drunk? I'm like, right there, one more, it's a wrap. That's where I was, and he tried to take advantage of me. And that's when it really clicked. Like as I'm laying there, I'm like, how does this seem so familiar? Why is this deja vu? You know what I mean? And so I had to call him out. He was like, oh no, that's not my intent. I didn't mean to hurt you like that. I was raised by women. I grew up around women. I would never do nothing like that. You know what I mean? But he never really just took accountability.
I have a black friend. That's what that is.
Yeah,
That sounds
basically, like I had a black friend.
skater.
I grew up, my mom raised me. I got 5 sisters.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just like, so I just feel like you just have to take a stand and not be afraid, and just hit up those people who you feel may have been or is currently being assaulted by that person too. Hey, just want to move to the side real quick. Is this your experience? If it's yours, and we can share that experience if you feel comfortable to. And then once you feel that you may have gathered up all your data or whatever, even if you don't listen and ask that group of people, just go straight to that person and be like, hey, this made me feel uncomfortable, or you did this to me. I feel like you assaulted me. You know, just call them out. Like there's like.
However, I would say do not do that.
Oh,
Can I add a piece to that question? Can I just ask another
What's
aspect?
up?
What does that look like for women who don't feel comfortable, or even men? Because I mean, I've been in situations, you know, my personal life. Like, what does that look like for people who don't feel comfortable?
I think sometimes it depends. So is it a person you see regularly, or somebody that you see when you decide to see them?
And also, is this a minor or is this someone who's an adult?
Right, and when you take those things into consideration, one, if you don't feel comfortable addressing it in person, the easiest remedy is to say, hit them on whatever and be like, you know what, XYZ made me uncomfortable, and before they can even respond, stop them. Because at the end of the day, if somebody has committed, it's not a matter of them affirming you and saying, oh yes, well I did that, and that was my intention. You're not looking for that affirmation, they're committed. They're them admitting that they did the wrong. The goal should be address the fact that you were wrong, but then take the necessary precautions to protect yourself from that person perpetuating that violence. And if you're to a point where, I just got more information in correlation to that. If you're in a situation where this person has some sort of dominance over you, then it becomes more tricky. But in this situation, the person who asked this question, they're 19, and the person that they believe is preying upon them and other people is in their 40s. And so in this situation, okay, so they said he texts me regularly and lets people come to his home. He made me uncomfortable at his home and I haven't returned since. We were professional, but he has other intentions. So honestly, if you don't have somebody older in your life that you can reach out to help you in addressing the situation, or you don't feel comfortable talking to somebody, I volunteer as somebody who can serve as the middle person. You're welcome to tap in with me. Chose has said that he is willing to reach out on your behalf and step in as a mode of protection if you feel like you need a male present in order to have that conversation, whether it's via the internet or via in person. But just know that there's people who are willing to support you through that, so you shouldn't have to feel like you're going through that alone. Like somebody.
You should call the male allies too that are watching this Zoom to put in the chat that they're available to be a middle person. This is a great area for men to be allies.
And so.
And also not to imagine that you're the only person this is happening to.
Right, you're definitely not alone in this situation, and like you said, she says she is interested in reaching out to other women who knows him, and thank you. And like I said, you're definitely supported in that, and the men that are on this call, or at least Chose himself, if you shoot me your email or something, I can connect you if you would like that resource. But I just want to make sure that you're supportive while trying to navigate this, because that's a lot to deal with as a 19-year-old, especially when somebody is in a position where they can try and use their age and their dominance in a way to take advantage of you. Another person on here has also made a comment since we've been having this discussion.
Should we also have a time check too? Do we want to keep this to an hour and a half?
I'm not stressing. We still got a lot of people.
I prefer to end at 9.
Okay.
Just because, you know,
For sure.
I'm being honest.
I got you. It's all good. Somebody has said, this is a guy, and he says, I feel things like this could be avoided if we as men put more value into other things growing up, like money, pride, and self-love. Also, we need to teach young men how cool it is to obtain consent. And also, as a man who grew up a Black man, that's how I was raised, and it worked for me. And I understand, like, he understands what consent means. And so, realistically, like, that's an honest conversation. Is like, we don't need to just teach kids consent and, hey, ask for permission to do X, Y, Z to somebody else, but also allow kids to give you consent. Ask the kid if they want to hug you. Don't say, go hug so-and-so, because you don't know if that kid has trauma and correlation to said individual. How are you perpetuating the same gratuitous violence against your kids that you claim to be against if you're forcing them to hug a male family or even a female family member who has made them uncomfortable in the past? And so just teaching them that you care about their autonomy so that they know that they have autonomy, but also teaching them how to respect other people's autonomy by instilling that within them in their own personal identity helps to resolve and to mitigate these issues when they grow up.
And to teach them that, like, dude is right, but like the bad conversations and the hard conversations are just as, I guess, useful as the ones that we make seem fun. Mm-hmm. Like, we shouldn't have to make shit fun for women to get treated right. Like, the hard conversations should be hard conversations. We should be open to learning that as men. So I feel like that's something, like, it's been questioned, right? Talking about consent in schools. Myself being, you know, like a middle school teacher, like, you should be able to have these conversations as early as communication is receivable to the youth's mind. That should be a thing, right? Like I mentioned earlier, my mom, in those words, I'm gonna beat your ass. That's just as detrimental to a brain, a child's brain, as teaching them how to hold the gun, teaching them how to drink, or teaching them how to, you know, touch a woman or abuse anything. Like, it's just as detrimental having those real conversations, but those are things that they have access to on the daily. Listening to rap music, objectifying women, right? Hypermasculinity. Those are things that they have access to early on, right? So I feel like including these conversations, like the whole excuse around like including, you know, LGBTQ education in schools. Like the excuse is, well, they shouldn't be able to learn that stuff early on. Well, they learn everything else early on. A lot of kids hump pillows growing up, right? So that's something like, what for me as a black man, I question all of the black men watching this, if you are watching this, what is the earliest age that you as a black man knew and realized that you liked women? It's okay to acknowledge that you were in kindergarten like I was. It's okay to acknowledge that you may have been younger. But it's also okay to be okay with other ones acknowledging that they like the same sex or that they do like transgender women at a young age. Because those are the ages where our habits turn either A, bad, or B, good, right? And when we internalize those things as youths and grow up to realize that the ways that we communicate things toward women and trans women, and I say it because right now in the place that we are in America, the two are separate, even though I myself see them as the same, but like they're obviously, you know, contradicting things going on right now with the Black community mainly. I don't care about the outside community because we need to do the work ourselves first. So our value is then pushed beyond just our eyes, right? But like, at what point did you, realize like, I like women? If you can't honestly say 5 or 6 years old and be okay with saying that, then you need to realize that you have a lot to unpack and a lot of work to do, because all of those lives that are being taken of trans women, and I'm trying my best to include trans women in this conversation because I don't know, but I also don't feel like we have representation here right now speaking on that. So I'm making sure that I, do that, and I don't want to feel like I'm intrusive to this space for women, but I want to make sure I include trans women in this conversation. So at what point, did you realize that you were a man, and that the behavior that you use in your everyday life is manhood? And 2, at what point did you realize that you like the woman? Those are very important questions to be able to acknowledge the psychology behind why you hate so badly, non-binary or transgender women or anybody who identifies as queer in general. There's women who don't look like me. There's women who don't have the same body parts as me, and there's women who do have the same body parts as me, right? So we need to, it's a lot to talk about, and there's a lot of things that need to be challenged in that manner. And I feel like, that's something that I want to ask and present, because when we talk about those easy conversations or making things fun, these conversations are not fun.
And that goes directly to what Viv was saying earlier. It's like, this work isn't pretty, and you can't hold people's hands and coddle them through this process. You have to learn, and it's going to be uncomfortable, because for people who are assaulted, it is uncomfortable. And it's a privilege to be able to say, oh, well, somebody just told me one day, you have to respect bodies, and that was it. Or, when a girl says yes, that's a great thing. Like, yeah, it's a great thing, but did you coerce her? And what does that process look? What does the process of consent look like to you? And do you acknowledge the different portions of rape culture? Like, coercion is still rape. Ghosting somebody is rape. Lying about who you're sleeping with and then having sex with somebody under false pretenses is still rape. Having sex intoxicated is still rape. All of these things are still rape. And so you have to think about the different facets in correlation to autonomy and how rape culture functions, and are you really doing the work? And what does consent look like when there's so many different ways where people can misconstrue somebody's participation as consent? Because it's not a matter of no means no, yes means yes. And if I say all of a sudden I've changed my mind, you have to understand that it is no longer a yes, it is a no. And a lot of people don't seem to get that because they want to think that it has to be cut and dry. But if they don't say no, then they're still open to it. And it's like, no, if they don't say yes, they were never open to it. It's like, it's really a matter of communication and understanding. And if they're not in a position where they can audibly say yes to you or give consent, then you cannot say that you've received consent. And then also, it's just like, to answer your question, said individual said that they were 16 when they first realized they had a crush on a woman. And so they said that they weren't interested or concerned about women before that point. They were just doing them. But the work does have to start early, because even little kids holding hands,
I still
like
say that that's early too. That's still.
that, you're minor, you're kids.
You're learning.
You're still in the process of learning about your identity and your body. You're a pubescent teenager at that point. Hormones.
And learning to admit what you like is still something at that age. Right? And when you don't attack that early on and confront it, it becomes misconstrued later in life. You have a bunch of men in the Black community who are down low, and it's because of the fact that they didn't confront those issues when they were younger in a healthy way, right? Acknowledgement of the question, who do you like, right? What do you like when you were young? What age did you realize? Those things.
What is it going to cost them in their family, their social standing,
Exactly.
friendships, to admit that?
And also, to the point where you were talking about a while ago, down low, that's why a majority of the trans violence, like the violent emergence of trans individuals takes place, is because these people, some of them who are down low, I guess, don't want to acknowledge the fact that they can be attracted to somebody with the same person. And so there are instances where people have had sex with these individuals and then killed them afterward because all of a sudden, oh wait, I just realized I did X, Y, and Z with somebody who had the same parts as me. And it's like,
on TikTok that went around for so long, it made it to Twitter, I'm sure it made it to Facebook, even though they always late. Like, it was on Twitter and stuff of like this white dude in the car, this Black trans woman in the driver's seat, and her mentioning, it was like I'm sure they put the video together, but she said something like, hey, I'm actually a man. Like, that's my born, these are my born parts. And he pulled out a gun, and apparently it was funny to the whole world. It was like, well, you need to dip, like, or I'm gonna shoot you, because that's not cool, right? And clearly to the room right now, judging the faces, that's not okay in any way, not even as a joke, because not only is the joke harmful to the person directly, but it's harmful to the community, right? And that's detrimental. That rhetoric of you need to dip, right? That perpetuates the wrong behavior and the behavior of the unknown feelings that you might have for said trans woman. You don't attack that, then you should be attacking the woman. You shouldn't be attacking the woman at all, but you need to attack what's going on within you first before you even confront that situation, because if you don't have understanding of what's going on, you're not able to admit that, you're only going to approach that situation wrong. So I don't know where I was going with that, but it was just that example. And then also going back to like what Azaria said, and then also answering like the question about like 15, 16, right? Like all of those things matter. And even though it seems like a lot of people who are listening might be like, oh, 15, 16, that's good, that's cool. I don't take that answer lightly, because as a man, no matter what age you are, when you realize those things and start to understand within yourself what you like, that's something that you need to realize, okay, now how do I put forth what I don't like? I went to OSA for high school. I grew up on 96 in Plymouth, and I went to school in the deep, and I grew up around nothing but drug dealers and, you know, hood niggas, right? So when I went to this school and everybody was so happy, right? It was a different environment for me. Now, add to the fact that these are my first interactions outside of my oldest cousin, who told me early on that it's okay to hug a man, and I never realized what he meant until I got older, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And I told him like, hey, I just realized what you told me a while back. Like, you know, but like my first interaction with gay men, you know, on a direct level, not just seeing them on TV screens or internet or whatever, was at OSA. And I felt embarrassed that a dude named D'Artagnan liked me, right? And I never attacked him or anything, but I felt embarrassed. I also called Mr. Cogman, I didn't call him anything, but I said faggot in front of Mr. Cogman. I didn't understand a lick, and I don't mean like I get that it's wrong to say the word faggot. I did not understand how my behavior was detrimental to him. Okay, I'm not gonna say the word faggot. That's not enough, because you don't understand. Okay, I'm not gonna call this woman a bitch. That's not enough, because you don't understand. Okay, I'm not gonna, I know she might have felt uncomfortable, but what did you gain from the situation knowing that she felt uncomfortable? How did you change your actions then, right? That's a big part of it, because a lot of the conversations lead, or from men's point of view, when they're in the wrong in these situations, is, well, my bad for making you feel uncomfortable. My bad for this. That's a big part of it, but that's the second half of it. Okay, I did wrong. Where did I go wrong? How could I listen better? How could I change, my behavior? Acknowledge that, and then say, okay, now I see why I did wrong, and why you felt this way. Because not confronting your actions are just as harmful as, telling a woman that it is okay to, like, entitlement, I guess, in the situation where I'm speaking to. Like saying like, hey, Don, can you do me a favor? Grab the key card off the desk and let her out. But acknowledging the entitlement in a man's behavior, especially a Black man, because we are the most entitled beings on this earth, and we also contribute heavily to the harm of Black women, and myself included, right? I'm still learning, and I'm learning every single day. And that's the reason why I'm asking these questions. That's also the reason why I'm so vocal on this topic, nonstop, at every moment that I can be. But to realize, like, what do I need to do to be better, right? And that's the first part of it.
I would just challenge what you just said. You said that Black men are the most entitled. I think that white men are the most entitled. That lack of agency for Black men rolls them.
I agree in a sense, but I'm also
it gets
speaking,
inflicted on other.
but the level of masculinity is different, right? When we go to a beach, right? How often do you see a Black man wearing what do they call it? Sandals, and like things that we as Black men see is not masculine, or like dudes holding their arm around their brother, or how white men would hug their brother and play all like what would be considered not masculine. And those behaviors for them are not as detrimental to women as our I guess disagreement to their behaviors is to Black men, right? And I feel like those behaviors that we as Black men disagree with, that they do like show and project onto the world is harmful more to Black women, because we don't acknowledge that within ourselves. We see these things as not masculine. In a sense, we try and, like you said, we try and assert our masculinity as Black men. And not only is that detrimental, whether it directly affects women or not, but it's detrimental to ourselves and how we will treat women in the future, right? And how our kids will treat women in the future. So I do agree, and it just depends on the level that we're talking about. I know as a Black man, I grew up seeing things like R&B music, stuff that would seem ridiculous and crazy, right? Or even like wearing thong sandals, or wearing shorts that's above the knee, right? Or wearing clothes like as tight as this even, like even tighter, right? Are seen as not masculine. Or if you go back to how we spoke about it in the harmful way when I was younger, it was gay to do that, almost as if that is a negative connotation. Like we attach that connotation as Black men to all of these things that women attributes to women, feelings, is not masculine. And like pink, purple.
4 years old, you learn all your colors, and you're sitting there like, oh, that's your favorite color.
Yeah, like the gender reveals are like.
Or just listen on the colors and all of a sudden tell a 4-year-old, oh, you can't like me.
Exactly, or you can't play with a Barbie doll. Don't play in my shoes. Like when you're curious at those young ages, and your behavior, this scientist, this Black scientist, I don't remember his name, but he is like one of the smartest people ever, right? And he talks about how when you're between the ages of 3 and 5 is when parents stunt your growth, learning wise, because they tell you no. It's not okay to break shit. It's not okay to experiment. It's not okay to disagree with the parent. Right? And he's not saying like he does this. He has a space for his kids and lets them fuck up. Lets them do whatever, break shit, daisies, whatever it may be in this room, it's okay. Because all those things are replaceable, but your actions when you get older are not. So I feel like when we talk about how detrimental Black men are to the community as a whole, I feel like we have the most power. Hip hop is the most influential thing right now in general. I won't say this because the thing as a whole, right? Tech companies use our lingo that originated from a Black man song to profit. And all of these white folk use all of that and continuously use our behaviors as a way to attribute negativity to Black men, right? And Black men continuously, produce negative content that jeopardizes the well-being of our Black women. And that's something that I feel like is widely contributed to the violence and abuse, mentally and physically, of Black women, which is why I said what I said. That was a long-winded way around the topic. But
and again, I'm just going to challenge you in that what you're explaining, what you're witnessing, is one aspect, right? And it's a big one. I'm not saying that it's not, because the other thing is who actually makes money off their raps or all different forms of hip hop often relates to how violent they're being, how they can be
and
used and
use
abused.
that, and this is in agreement with that. When you talk about the artists who are independent and the artists who are not, the obvious discernment between the two is huge.
Right.
A Suno is not speaking like of the future. When it's signed, when isn't, right? And that's why we like.
So the challenge that I want to put forth is that there are many Black men who are in fact more educated, and not that education is the cutoff point.
Education comes in many ways, not just.
Right, but what I'm saying, who are more willing to put on a thong, who are more willing to dress differently, who are in spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
There's a spectrum of experiences, and yet what gets held up, right? What gets used to make a puppet prophet stereotype. And it's a stereotype isn't that it doesn't exist, it's that it's a one-dimensional version, right? And when we only have one story, then we believe that story, then we hold it, right? And it allows us to criminalize Black men. It allows us to see them as more dangerous, more animal-like, more all of these things, in order that we can justify, how many of these men are in prison, how many, like communities where people are cut off.
I think even to your point, in the same way that we, like you said, we forget the spectrum, because it's not so much that, it is so much to say that white masculinity is different from Black masculinity, wholeheartedly. But in doing so, the dominant narrative that is told about Black masculinity completely does away with the spectrum of what Black masculinity looks like on a very real and on the ground basis, but because it is upheld in the way that it does, and all those effects and all those things kind of trickle down. I think that in the same way, though, I feel like, to your point, Black men do hold a lot of power in how Black women are treated because of that narrative, and because that narrative is upheld. So it does, to come back to your point, to what you said earlier, it does come back to us figuring it out and doing the work within the community, because essentially the non-Black communities are mirroring and treating us, all of us, and at the bottom of the total, Black women, how they see we are treated by our own. So they are mirroring the behaviors that, the language, the behavior, the dominant narrative, and completely doing away with the spectrum in the same way that we do away with the spectrum. They are mirroring that behavior. They are enacting that behavior on us, and they're profiting off our behavior in a substantial way.
And it's weird because a lot of history will tell you that when we talk about gender roles, often in every other culture, the roles were reversed in a way to where not the action itself, but the intent behind the role, right? The hunter and the one who stays home and runs head of household were two different things. And then the word lonely was not even a word in Africa until, oppression and slavery came into play. And it's a lot of history that documents that women were heads of household, and it often ran better because of the caring part, the things that we can't, it's normalized now. And as much as we try and break away from gender roles, it's still in our minds and ingrained in our minds because it's a society that we've been part of for so many years as America, right? And but it's something that's trickled down from there to where all of these ways that we interact as a Black community now isn't even natural to us in a sense. And that part is like something that I'm in strong belief of, as far as like we need to realize where we do come from and have more understanding of because we are literally the only people in the world, not Black people, right, but African Americans who are part of a lost tribe, meaning that how many of y'all can pinpoint, not going to any of these DNA websites and learn that you part this and 30% this and 20% this, but I know tons of African people, even Jamaican people who, of course, have some roots in the homeland, but like they have a land to call home. Haitians have a land to call home, right? Even our Afro-Latino counterparts have a place to call home, right? And they're aware of and understand the cycle, the psyche behind it. And it's a lot more than what we have here, right? So the lack thereof knowledge also contributes to a lot of these behaviors that, we as Black men justify as, healthy. I have a friend named George, lives in Oklahoma, he's from Bryan, Texas, and he's very vocal about, how we Black men see women, and also is very vocal about trans women. And on a national level now, to where Jadena and I forget her name right now, I know I'm blanking on her name, but yeah, Janelle Monáe and all of these people are, either praised in a way to where they acknowledge that he, as a cisgender, cis-hetero man, is doing his part in the contribution, but he's also, doing the work previous to, these issues, meaning he's studying A, B, and C, whatever policies, whatever relationships we had as a people in our homelands or whatever it may be, in ways that we understand how those behaviors contribute to whatever negative thing, we as Black men are perpetuating today.
Well, and I would suggest that it's only in this country that we are Black.
Yes, completely.
Right? If you are in France and you meet what we call a Black woman, you might say, I'm Senegalese, or I'm Ghanaian, or I'm Tanzanian, or whatever the thing is. Like there's a direct relationship, right? And in the same way, white people aren't going to say I'm white, they're going to say I'm French, or Italian, or German, or Dutch, or whatever the thing is. And that erasure has has had such a detriment.
And I'm not saying that to, yeah. And I'm not saying that to excuse any man's behavior. I'm just saying for the men themselves, like all of these things, as far away as they are from the actual topic of the conversation, they are still, contribute to the harm and the negative rhetoric that leads to, rape culture, and how we as men don't contribute positively to, solutions to rape culture.
Unroot the tree, right? Then, it's like how do you stand? How do you stand in conviction? How do you stand in integrity? How do you stand in clarity? You've been unrooted, you've been disrupted, you've been disrespected the entire time.
I think it's just your entire life, but it's generations.
Right.
So it's like,
And that's why I like the dialogue that I have about cancel culture. Because I feel like cancel culture in its current definition is negative. And it doesn't contribute to growth in its current definition. Now, cancel culture, as far as what Azaria was mentioning, as far as deplatforming and all of those solutions that
leadership.
Yeah, that leads to self-learning and understanding, unlearning and relearning in a sense. That part of cancel culture should be the new definition. Don't cancel this human being to where they're, like Ashay said, they're free to be able to sit at home, or I think it was maybe there too, what y'all said, but be able to sit at home and be like, well, she's still a bitch, or I'm still going to do this to the next person, or she's still this, or whatever the dialogue may be between them and themselves. Like, challenge them to grow from it. So, yeah.
In your way. Challenge them in your way. You don't have to be as confrontational or vocal about it. If you're soft-spoken and you're a writer, you know what I mean? You want to challenge them about writing something. Do that. If you're a singer or if you're a rapper, whatever, make a song about it. Challenge them in your way. You know what I mean?
But a lot of people are starting to log off. It has hit 9 o'clock. I'll share the last comment that I got, which actually came from my god sister. She said she had to log off, but thank you to everyone for sharing your truths and wisdom. Thank you for creating a space and dialogue around keeping each other accountable, allowing people space to heal and grow, exposing instead of canceling, and supporting each other's journey through defining and establishing safety for themselves and others. Keep the conversations going in this space and all spaces below. So thank you to everybody who logged in. We really appreciate your willingness to both hear us and to contribute to the conversation. If you have more questions when the video is posted on YouTube, you are welcome to leave comments. I believe we have intentions to having a part 2 to this conversation and kind of regrouping after we hear more feedback from the community and also giving people more advance notice so more people can participate. But we really appreciate you guys coming out, and somebody said they appreciate us. All right.
I appreciate y'all too.
Any last words, guys? Y'all got any last words? Stay black. Stay safe. All right. Wear your mask and social distance and wash your hands and your butt.